Welcome to Social Commerce in Action. I'm your host, Daryl Wurzbacher. As you arrive, introduce yourself in the comments. We'd love to hear from you and love to see the people who are attending. So over the past couple of years, I've been seeing a huge shift in companies focusing heavily on implementing social commerce strategies. And everyone's trying new things. Everybody's trying to figure out what's working, what's not. And my goal of this show is to bring together thought leaders in both the direct sales industry along with adjacent verticals to learn what's working, what are some strategies we can adapt, and again, what's working out there. Now, when we talk about social commerce, the reality is our industry has really been at the forefront of social commerce as it's evolved, because the core of our model is about relationships. It's about, again, those one-on-one relationships, influencer relationships. It's all about building relationships. So what I'll be doing is bringing on guests to speak on a wide range of topics that are critical for us to deliver, to have a successful social commerce strategy. So, from core business model areas like customer loyalty programs, referral rewards, how does party and the modern party tie into referral rewards and bringing on new customers, to affiliate compensation, what's working? People are adding affiliate to existing sales compensation. What works there? What are some evolutions that we're seeing that are successful? And also talking about technology. Where are we seeing? What are people leveraging and what's working? We've worked with many companies that do live streaming, sampling, apps, all of these innovative concepts. What's actually working? So today I'm super excited to bring on our first guest. He's someone who has a pulse on the industry, the evolution of social commerce. He's worn many hats over the years, from building and managing sales teams to being in change management consulting for many companies in our space, along with his current role as the general manager of PM International for the United States. In addition to these roles that he's had, he's also on the Direct Selling Association Research Committee. So really having great insights into what's happening in the industry and where the industry is going. So I'm excited to introduce Gordon Hester. Gordon, welcome to the show.
Yeah, Daryl, thank you very much. I'm excited to be here and not just share some insight, but learn too. It's always both for me.
Excellent, excellent. So as I mentioned, the industry has evolved significantly over the past few years. A lot of growth during COVID to what we're seeing now. What are you seeing? What's been the evolution? What strategies have worked, and kind of what are you seeing?
I would say for the most part, I always say it's about being competitive and relevant in the marketplace. And to do that, you have to look at, we're in the game of building engaged critical mass. So you have to kind of look at where are the fundamentals practiced today. So I think it really comes down to transition effectively to be competitive. You have to understand all the fundamentals that actually are timeless and drive your business, and then evolve toward sort of where they're working today. So I'll give you a perfect example. Everybody still uses the concept of a memory jogger, a warm market. So who do you know? We've been micro influencers for as many years as we've been direct selling. What's changed is where the audience is. Today, the audience is in social and digital. And we're finding more and more there's a transition of that, not only for the company to figure out how to do that with their brand visibility, and also with potentially helping with lead gen and sales. But more important, how do you support the field in all this and do it in a way where not only it helps support them, but it's also regulatory compliant, which is, of course, is a growing issue with social, since that's sort of where all the web crawlers and things are focused in that world. That's kind of what we have to manage.
So when you mentioned like lead gen and some of the strategies kind of evolving into social, and what are you seeing there, right? Like, are there certain practices that are working best? When you think about lead generation, we've talked a lot over the years of companies that are willing to go directly to the market and get customers directly and then distribute them out, whereas other companies are very against that. How do you see that evolving? Is that a big part of that strategy as well?
Yeah, it's an interesting question because it brings into a core issue in, are you competing with your field or are you supporting your field? So I know companies, for instance, that all the SEO and lead generation they run, they keep those leads, and their kind of value to the field is whatever we will learn with e-commerce, we put on your personal website. And that's kind of the extreme. Equally, you're seeing companies now that'll say, okay, we're going to run it and we're going to pass it on to certain criteria. It might be your qualifiers, might be people that get a certain amount of volume this month, whatever it might be. And they might keep like the first retail sale to overcome cost. And then there are companies that simply, as soon as they get a lead, they move it. I even know one company that sells their leads to a field. But at the end of the day, I think it's important, and we've done studies in the DSA about this. People like leads. They would like to have more, because just because they're social commerce and social media doesn't mean they know how to work within that. So it's become a popular thing. I think in the last couple of years, I don't think there's a one magic strategy. I think a lot of it has to do with your business and the trust level that exists and the strength of your product, a lot of factors that go into that. But I do find more and more, especially when I was doing consulting, these became regular conversations that I was having. I think there's a lot going on there.
Now, one of, I've heard different people talk in the industry about kind of the perception between, are the consultants really focused on customer acquisition versus customer relationships and building that kind of long-term value? So I've heard people talking about like lead gen like this, where it's just giving out the leads, whereas other sides, they're about bringing on customers, right? So that's what the job of the consultant is. And I've seen some of the shift more so to, the companies are managing the relationship, right? They're doing the communications. They're communicating to customers more so than the field in a lot of cases. How do you see that? What's right in kind of the more modern companies that are successful with this?
I think the key in all of it is field buy-in. So I've seen companies successfully do lead gen, and it create a huge distrust with the field because the field felt like it was competing against them. And there are companies that's okay. That's part of their strategy to do that. But I always recognize without field buy-in, everything becomes a challenge. So if you're doing lead gen and there's a good program around it and the field is behind it, then you won't get the pushback and the low engagement and all the complaining and everything that tends to go with this. So I think a lot of it just goes down to getting your field to buy in and to understand that lead gen is a support function. It's not a competition. It is really about how do we take these leads and give them to the right people so that we can turn a lead into a customer and a customer into a long-term loyal customer. And that's kind of where the shift has been. It's always been, for many, many years, it was the field's job to do all this. And anybody that's worked in the field would tell you they're really good at customer acquisition, but that tends to be where it ends. They're not quite as committed to follow up. And a lot of the incentive structures and promotions are kind of built around new business. Oh. So, you can preach follow up to your blue in the face. It doesn't mean they're going to do it. So what's happened is companies have come in and recognized we need a relationship with the consumers too, because if you think about the churn at the early stage of our business model, it can be really important to have those relationships so that if potentially a distributor leaves, that their customers might stay on. And this is where you've seen like a lot of CRMs and campaigns. I remember in 2016, we did a study in the DSA and less than 50% of the companies had a CRM. Today, I bet you they all have it. And they are literally building campaigns for customer acquisition, for customer retention, for all types of things. And so I think the evolution today is really the companies getting more involved to support the relationship building process, not just on the customer side, but on the opportunity side too. And they're just getting more and more involved. But if the field sees that as a competition, then you're probably creating a challenge that you don't necessarily want.
That totally makes sense. You definitely can't be competing with the field and making that. It totally makes sense. But I've seen the same thing, right? That focus on customer loyalty and pushing that from corporate. Now, you've mentioned before about, people building for today versus in the past. And specifically when you look at building like sales teams and bringing on affiliates, what do you see as the biggest change and shift in that mindset over the last several years? And kind of what is the modern way of building?
I think it always comes back to how the timeless fundamentals work in the marketplace. So when I look at things today with the field, I think they are, I want to ask me the question one more time. I'm sorry.
So you made the comment in the past about like building for today versus in the past, right? So people are like, where do you see that? Like what's different now? What do you see as successful?
So I think today there's a couple of things that are different. One is the marketplace is different. So if I look at it from the consumer side, consumers today buy on discounts. They buy on promos and incentives. A statistic I saw the other day, I think it might have been with eMarketer, was 82% of all the sales that occurred over the Christmas and Thanksgiving buying period were all done on incentives. So you have to understand, at the end of the day, the strength of any company is the consumer. Because if they're not continuing to buy product, then you don't have sales. And if you don't have sales, then you're not going to have commissions. And so that's factor number one. The other thing is the cost associated with this has went way up. So we just did a data tracker study that kind of really demonstrated the extent of this. The operational costs have skyrocketed, ingredients costs have skyrocketed. We were looking at even the ingredients increase of 16 to 32% this last year. And every company is facing the same situation. So it creates a lot of challenges on how you manage all this effectively. And look at the cost of technology. If you look at just the technology to support a customer acquisition, I have to build tools to be able to do that, to share in social media. I have to be able to have solutions, building marketing collateral. So the lift to support the field in this has all become bigger and tougher. And I mean, I have a tech company with my son, Connor, and it's like, how many platforms are we having to learn these days? And that's the other interesting thing. We've seen a huge amount of what I would call traditional e-commerce companies coming into direct selling. So now you're starting to, when I say old school are these companies that coming in that understand the consumer side and are really good at keeping customers. They're just trying to put a compensation model in to get more people that do that. So you're now competing with experts in this, where before it was really driven a lot around the opportunity, although the products and service have always been important. So I think the way the business is built today has really shifted. There are fundamental things like memory joggers, but the technologies used, the consumer behavior, even the opportunity side. Today, I always tell people we're not in a recruiting game, we're in an attraction game. How recruiting worked in the past doesn't necessarily work that well today. So when you look at the distributors that are successful, they're personal brands in social commerce and social media, and they know that game really well. And that's why they're being successful. So because the marketplace is shifting on the opportunity and consumer side, and even on the employment side, everybody wants to be virtual now. And a lot of people want people in their office. So all this stuff is going on, and it makes the transition of the business to stay competitive harder and harder. And of course, the speed of change is growing faster and faster by the day. So yeah, it's an interesting time, but for those that continue to innovate to be competitive, and what I mean by competitive is, what does it take to build engaged critical mass? We're in the relationship business, and what technologies and strategies do you have to use to make that work? That becomes the conversation that has to happen. And so in my consulting business, I was always asked to fix things. I felt like I was just basically in the fixing business. And what I recognize, and it's an old adage, the seven most dangerous words in business are, we've always done it this way. And I heard that a lot. Well, we can't do that. We've always done it this way. And it's like, well, how's that working out for you? And at some point, even the tough decisions with strategy are required to make decisions. As costs have went up, you have a lot of like US companies that are looking at compensation plans, for instance, because as costs go up, profitability is going to go down, has to adjust somewhere. And, so when I talk to them, it's like, how do we lower our payout? How do we make sure our retailers, or what I call the base, your retailers and your customer gatherers, are paid fairly and have a good deal on the product side? This is foundational to success. And even the shift of putting a lot more attention on that group than the group outside of it. So I always, with all the data I looked at, I would say typically 70 to 95% of all business sales, recruiting, and customer acquisition comes from that small group at the beginning. So if you just think about it from a common sense, how do you establish leadership if you can't build that stable, growing base? And the companies that are good understand that, and that's where their focus is. They systemize around that. They're doing onboarding. They're giving the tools to those people who are not seasoned leaders by any means. And that's where I think the shift is going, and that's what competitive looks like today. Even take events. I mean, the attendance for events have always driven the business. But when COVID hit, all of a sudden the events changed. And now it's like, how many people can we get back live for an event? Because, the marketplace has changed. People don't want to travel. The economics have changed. So you always have to be agile and have a DNA of innovation, but it's always about where is the relationship part failing and how do I solve that?
Now, in your book, you had a book that came out a couple of years ago, Positioned Right. And in the book, you talk about a distributor engagement journey map. And I think that's kind of what you're alluding to here, like kind of the different kind of ways of segmenting the distributors. And maybe talk to that a bit, because that's been a big theme in our industry for a while. And I think your framing of that really kind of makes it really concise. So maybe share a bit about that and how you see that.
Yeah, so I always defined engagement as a behavioral formula. And it's that engagement is the triumph of hope over experiences. So from a simple perspective, there's two variables. There's hope and experiences. And I would say our industry has always been really good at marketing hope, and around whatever that might be. The problem is that business is an experience game. Hope is just your belief system about the future, and it's all driven by the experiences people have with you. So at the end of the day, engagement is an experience game, and you have to look at it from that perspective. Are the experiences people having positive, meaningful? Do they create hope? Do they confirm hope? Do they magnify hope? And the easiest way to do that is through mapping. So I'll just give you an example. Somebody new comes in and you can ask a company, well, what are you doing? Well, if they order a product, are you then saying first automated email or video, whatever it might be, whatever the tool might be is, hey, by the way, you ordered this product A, here's what it does, here's the benefits, here's how you take it, here's your tracking number. 3 days later, maybe they get a video. Hey, here's one of our customers and what they said about this product. And that really matters in the initial stage of this business. So if companies think automating and expanding communication to strengthen people's experiences and beliefs, then what you'll do is you'll continue to build that solid base.
Which seems like just a basic, and what you said earlier about these companies coming from direct to consumer, e-commerce into our industry, that's the ones I think have really done a good job there. When I've talked to companies that have figured it out, because that's really just general customer retention, right? Customer loyalty, what you should do with customers, right? But I think that's the piece that most companies, at least from what I've seen, don't give enough time to figure out that strategy. So even if you have the tools or capabilities, it's the strategic way of kind of looking at that. How do you approach it from a journey map, or how would you recommend a company?
I map everything. I'm a process guy. I think if you're going to scale anything, you have to scale through process, not tribal knowledge. It makes it really tough. But at the end of the day, if you don't have a way of continuing to communicate with people, engagement won't work. It's simplest question, and you could ask anybody on here, how do you build healthy long-term relationships with bad communication? And the answer is you don't. So today, there's a focus on communication. And also, this is kind of the segmentation movement. About 70% of distributors are really wholesale buyers. So now you're seeing them kind of moved into the customer bucket, moving away from your income disclosures and these types of things. And this is a huge advantage because the consumer journey is different than the distributor journey. With the distributor journey, it's like, okay, what's the quickest way that I can get them set up for success? What do I need them to do the first 72 hours, which is the most critical point? So you basically build this framework for doing it, and then you start filling in the pieces, you automate it, and then you just follow the data and see what it tells you and continue to innovate.
Now, when you talk about that, like in that kind of tying into like even promotions, right? Because as you go through that journey, I would envision, you have the loyalty aspects of that, of how do you retain them and how do they stay engaged? Then you also have promotions. How do you kind of look at that in terms of, especially when you talk about costs going up, and how do companies look at that, right? Allocating resources towards, ad hoc promotions to drive, ad hoc sales versus loyalty programs. How do you look at that?
I have found, and maybe you've seen it with you have a lot of customers, obviously a lot of clients too. I have found they're actually paying more attention to these types of things, and really how are we using promotions, incentives. Like I recently brought in flash sales as another tool in August of last year, actually building the system for all of PM. And those simple sales that we only utilized in two ways: if we had expiring product, or in any network marketing, usually the last part of the month is where you see a lot of your business, but moving that forward, like putting a flash sale the first week or the second week, so that you can keep that engagement, so you don't have gap periods. And literally millions of dollars in new sales because of a promotion. And it can be challenging if you have a small SKU count. And there's different strategies. Like some people would tell you, we'll never take our core product and discount it. Other companies do that all the time. So I think you got to really look at the nature of your business model, your SKU count. There's a lot of things that go into that. But yeah, I think today, if you're not driving the business, the consumer side of the business with incentives and promotions, you're probably going against the sort of tide of people buying on incentives. I mean, you can't ignore that. Add to that the economic culture. I don't know if I ever shared this with you, but probably in October, I read this big study, and the study was on auto ships, and they called them subscription models, which, by the way, is, as you know, a very common tool. And the question asked, how much loyalty do you have with somebody on a subscription model in the environment we had? And the answer was shocking, 3%. So if you think about, if you think putting somebody on that, the job's done, in today's world, it's not done. And that's the huge thing that companies have to adjust to. Yes, recruiting and customer acquisition are important, but they are not as important as what happens after that. That's the relationship game. You can't leave that to chance. You have to invest into those relationships, the communication of them, giving them the information they want, making things available to them. This all becomes critical to building the base the right way.
And you mentioned communication. I mean, that's all stuff that should, I mean, you have the one side of like having the consultants go out there and like, again, build relationships, but a lot of that can be automated, right? I mean, a lot of like, is that what you've seen too, is like the automation of like the drip campaigns, the post-purchase instructions and guidance? Do you see it generally automated, or is that more of stuff where it's like, hey, from a field or from a corporate perspective, they need to do more activity? Well, how do you see that?
Yeah, no, I think a lot of it is being automated, especially campaigns. I see more and more of that. But I also think it's important to get your field involved in that process. And the hardest thing for them is to get them to understand the value of a follow-up, because they usually, like I said, they think the job's done. So yeah, it's really important that the companies stay involved in all that.
Makes sense. Now you mentioned about discounting and kind of promotions and managing all that, because that is the climate, right? Everywhere you see it's discounts and promotions. What's interesting about like when you talk about affiliate or direct selling, it's that reduces the profit they earn, right? How do you see that, right? How has that been balanced in terms of like, yeah, you're increasing more net sales, but it's less. How do you had consultants, or how have you dealt with that in terms of any sort of concerns or challenges about from the field?
Well, I think the challenge is often that, yes, you're going to get more consumer volume, but you pay commissions tend to be on what I call cash basis. So really what somebody pays for it, commissions are based on. So a lot of times the field will look at that. It's like, well, you're taking money out of our pocket, not understanding actually we're doing the exact opposite. We're investing in a bigger base and a solid relationship business. And long-term, that's going to pay huge dividends to you. Huge dividends.
Totally makes sense. Now, when you see companies that are entering the space, right? We talk about the ones that are coming, because we have a number of clients that have also kind of come from those adjacent verticals, direct to consumer, not in a direct sales, person to person, at least what we're doing. How have you advised them in terms of like comp plans? And, is there trends you're seeing that are kind of, the best of affiliate plus being able to build sales teams? Like, are there certain patterns or certain things you're seeing or certain things you'd recommend?
Yeah, certainly there's things I'm seeing. The first is for them in general, not everybody is looking at lowering their payouts to comp plans. Okay. And the reason they're lowering it is because operational costs have went up. They aren't really given much of a choice to do that. The other thing is, there was a time where you could pretty easily pay out 50% of all your sales in commissions. Today, that's probably closer to 35%. So if you're trying to adjust that, it's just not paying out less, but it's who you're paying. So the trend today is, how do we get the retailers to make more commissions? So when I look at the industry, I see things from 20% all the way up to 45 or 50% on retail. that they're paying out in commissions, knowing that this is the group at the beginning that really matters. And if we can pay them fairly, they will go to work. And one of the things that I took away from Dan Jensen was this idea of a golden handcuffs. Like, what does it really take for somebody to stay involved? And in his data, it was $300 to $500 a month. So if you have a strong retail, you can make $300 to $500 a month and never recruit a team, which, by the way, is about 80% of all our reps never recruit a team. So this idea of recruiting saves everything has actually caused people, as it's really declined at like an epic rate, to really now take a look at, gosh, we really need to do a better job keeping what we have, because we don't have that flow of new people coming in. And I think that's where a lot of the shift has been. And it's really about paying the base better. And, it's not that the leaders don't matter, quite the opposite. They're really important. However, most legacy companies would probably tell you they're at least having conversations about how much money is getting paid out that they're not getting production for. And that's sort of the network marketing model. But you can't indefinitely pay out money without getting any value. And one of the big CEOs, I won't say who it is, but they said something in an event I never forgot. This was last November. And this is one of the billion-dollar companies. And he goes, we had conversations and we've decided we're no longer paying for retirement programs, only production. And I think that's the attitude, because production is important. Momentum is important. If you have momentum, you'll have growth. If you have growth, then you have more money to invest, more money to kind of deal with the environment that you're in. But when you lose those things, and that's kind of what recruiting has done, it has caused a free-for-all of sales. And I mean, look at 2022. There's certainly more companies going backwards than forwards. And that's causing them to shift. But if they continue to say, well, it's about getting new people, instead of saying new people without a relationship process that works just means more churn. So I think there's a huge shift in that context. Even with customer acquisition, okay, now it's loyalty programs, it's preferred customer programs. It's all these things to drive the business of relationships.
And I see that. I mean, you're exactly right. That's exact trends we've seen as well. I mean, it's the exact. And I think that even ties into the struggle that existing companies have, where you compete with these new entrants that have the ability to pay a higher, retail profit and higher, that I think is the big struggle that existing companies have. And like, how do you adapt? How do you kind of skate where the puck's going? Have you seen any lessons? Like, have people been able to really figure out a good way of doing that? Or is it really just having those tough conversations and really kind of figuring out, how to model and how to, the winners and losers? Like, how do you see it, or how have companies navigate that?
To me, everything starts with unity. I got to get everybody understanding the blueprint of how we build a successful company, and understanding everybody's role, and that we're all working together. There's no competition. It's not us against them. And it's really becoming more of a joint effort. So I think you've really got to look at it from that perspective. Right now, I find that there's a lot of distrust in the marketplace, and I'm talking about with the field, and it shows, because as things start declining, so when you're not relevant, what happens? What's the process? Sales start declining. When sales start declining, you get in the need to right size. When right sizing happens, you're also decreasing the commissions that people get paid. And the longer this goes on, the more challenging it is. So to me, the best answer is don't lose momentum for too long. Get everybody unified around a plan and stay focused on momentum. And it's funny, I just had a talk with Mr. Sorg from PM about this in a recent call, and he had given me some great advice. So December was our biggest month in the US ever, which December, most of the time, is the exact opposite. And he called me up after a leadership event, and he goes, I just want to remind you that December's 31 days. Don't lose the momentum. And we had our biggest month ever, and it is carrying over into this month. And when you look at PM, how do you have 29 straight years of growth? It's really easy. Don't ever lose the momentum. And if you feed it properly and you stay relevant, you don't have to do a lot of these things. Like, I'll just use comp plan since you brought it up. PM has never changed their comp plan in any way that didn't add to the payout to the field. Now think about that in the context of what's going on. And the reason they can do that is because they're not going through what's going on in the industry, which is this failure to transition effectively And also, I would say the other part of that is you have to recognize, as all this stuff in social commerce and digital is coming out, we're starting to hear all this conversation about omni-channel and how many places do we mark. We're on, the buy and sell sites. We're on Amazon. We're doing all these things. But at the end of the day, we're in the direct selling business. And I think at some point you have to kind of look at it from that context and say, are we being the best direct seller we're going to be? Because if our movement is away from being that, and you're going to become like all these distribution channels, you're just going to create more problems with the field. And I will tell you, and AdvoCare is probably a good example of this. They were able to make that shift to an affiliate model. And part of the reason is because they had a strong product with the consumers. So if you don't have that strong product with consumers and you're not connected with them, that shift away from the field is catastrophic. And that's why you're seeing companies dropping, companies that are down 90% in 3 years. This is hard to recover from. And I think you always have to look and say, at the end of the day, what are we going to be? Are we going to be a one side, all these different things we're doing? Are we just going to be the best direct sellers we can be? And I think at PM, that's Mr. Sorg. That's what he's always been, the best direct seller he can be. And these kind of conversations with him come to an end very quickly because he just wants to be the best direct seller. So I think there's a lesson in that for a lot of people. And I can tell you on the consulting side, for 7 years, I did change management. The more distrust you have with the field, the harder it is to change anything. So this is a big issue right now that companies have to take a hard look at. And of course, the other thing with the social commerce is the regulatory environment. That's where they're all looking for problems. And unfortunately, we're sort of held accountable to a global social commerce model. So that's hard and also held accountable for people that put things in there that are gone now that you can't take out of social media. So there's a lot going on there. Certainly on the regulatory side, I would say there's more scrutiny than I've seen in 35 years in the business. And I know a lot of people worry about it, but I actually think it's good for the business, because at the end of the day, we should all care about being honest and protecting consumers. And I don't think our business requires us to misrepresent anything. We have good people, we have good products. The distribution channel is proven. I mean, I have data going back to 84, and I think it's like cumulatively global, we've done like $3.4 trillion in sales over that time period. Hard to argue the model doesn't work. But now people are getting away from the model and not understanding what it is today. And I think the longer you do that, the worse it gets.
Great advice. And we're going to wrap it up after this. I'm just keeping it 30 minutes. But I do want to kind of just recap then in terms of like what you're really saying then is it's really the foundations, right? It's getting back to fundamentals, customers, having real customer journeys, promotions, driving sales and that, and then the foundations, even with the direct sales side of things and really the field and the relationship and maintaining trust. Any other parting words or parting advice you'd like to share before we wrap it up?
No, I think it's important to understand the longer you wait to transition, the harder it is. And the speed of that's only going to continue. And that if you are making decisions that aren't building relationships, you might want to go back and revisit that. If you're making decisions where you're losing trust with the field, you might want to go back and figure out how to get them in the game with you versus them thinking you're against them. And I think you got to take a hard look at all the platforms. Like technology is a good example. 10 years ago, it was all monolithic. Now it's all decoupled. Look at Shopify as an example. Why does it work? Because there's 3,000 plugins to it that allow you to do everything. So even tech's changing, everything is changing, and it requires, and also new people. You can't have a person running a company that doesn't know how to do an email and be effective in digital and social and technology. You need that younger generation that really understands this world. I mean, look at what I got with Connor. I go to him for advice, and he's 25 years old. But it's just a different world we live in.
Well, I appreciate your time, Gordon. Great advice, great time. Thank you for your time, and thank you all who joined.
Oh, my pleasure, and thanks for having it, and hope everybody got some value out of it.
Awesome. Thank you, Gordon.